We all know someone who has been in the military. Whether it's a grandparent, a friend from school, a new colleague, you've heard their stories. And you might think you know what life in the force looks like, but do you? Signing up for duty, deployment overseas, moving from mission to mission, sure, that's all a part of it. But what skills do you learn in the force that you don't get anywhere else? And what happens when you decide to leave? There are close to 18 million veterans in the United States. That's 6% of the adult population in this country. All of them have had to start a new life. And finding out how to begin again is really not that straightforward. So for our first series, we bring you a tale of reinvention. From the Air Force to local government, this is a tale about public service.
In the service, there's all types of jobs out there. There's jobs from being a cook to being the J2 for the state of Minnesota's National Guard, being in charge of all intelligence collection operations.
If you are in local government and if you've also been a veteran, you're very committed to public service. And that's a natural kind of alignment.
The last thing I want to do is feel like I'm getting kicked off a team when I love. I'm going to go ahead and retire and then prepare myself over the next year for the ultimate transition into the rest of my life.
Over the next 3 episodes, you're going to hear from people whose life mission through and through is to serve others. And you're going to follow one man on his journey to open the next chapter. You ready? Often when we talk about social change, we think about protests, new laws, people helping people, and stories of redemption and justice. But social change, it can start with one person changing their life and finding support to make that jump. Social change, it's finding hidden talent and giving people an opportunity to do good when they're needed. This is Impact in Action. On this podcast, we travel around the country to see what social transformation looks like on the ground. We tell the real stories behind every life-changing impact solution. We're MGT, a provider of specialized technology and advisory solutions. Social impact, it's what we do every day. So let's take you to the heart of the action. Today, we're moving across the map from North Dakota to Virginia, Florida, and beyond with our special guest, Tom Joyce.
If you have something to say and it can add to the conversation, say it. You can't be sitting on your hands. And what that means is whatever you do your best at it and have an impact. Take action.
I'm Chase Christiansen. Welcome to Impact in Action. All right, let's get started. Our story today begins with one man. His name is Tom, TJ if you know him.
My name is Tom Joyce. I'm the assistant city manager in the city of Minot, North Dakota. So for those who are not familiar with that, it's in north central North Dakota, city of about 50,000, fairly isolated, and about 50 miles south of the Canadian border.
Over the next few episodes, you're going to hear his voice a lot. So it's only fair we got to know each other better. Tom lives in North Dakota in the city of Minot. Minot it's a smallish place with like 50,000 residents. It's not tiny, but it still has that community feel. You've got the outdoors and life goes at a pretty easy pace. Now, there are essentially 3 things that put Minot on the map. One is the weather, which you could say is extreme. We're talking snow and some brutally cold temperatures in the winter.
I got up here in mid-January of last year, and it can be cold here in North Dakota. And it's funny, a lot of my friends, they were going, Minot, isn't that way up there? And they're questioning me, looking at me with a quizzical look. And I said, you know what? If I told you I was moving to Winnipeg, you would say, that is cool. You're going to Winnipeg. That's in Canada. That's cool. And then I would say, well, Winnipeg is significantly more north than Minot, right?
The second thing that you might need to know about Minot is their Scandinavian festival, Norse Hostfest, if that rings a bell. It comes around every fall. And the third thing, the thing that they're most famous for, is the Minot Air Force Base. A lot of military families and people from all over the country go through Minot. Keep that in mind for later. As you can guess, it plays a part in how Tom got here. For now, all you need to remember is that Minot is a vibrant little city, and Tom's job is to look after it. Tom works for the city government. As an assistant manager, he serves on the executive team to lead important public work, stuff like engineering, public utilities, water, recycling, that kind of stuff.
On a day-to-day basis, I try to move the organization forward, and that may be just regularly scheduled one-on-ones with my direct reports. That might be some other standing meetings that encompass the entirety of the city, be it public works, emergency services. And then I try to leave a little bit of white space in there where I can do some learning. I'm awful at sitting behind my desk all day. I tend to be a little bit of an Energizer bunny. I like to get out and about and seeing the folks and seeing what they do and the people who are really doing the heavy lifting for the city.
I'm sure you can tell already, but Tom is active. He likes to roll up his sleeves and work in the field. That's how he spends every day. Now, the story of how Tom got here, we're going to get into it. And, well, it's a long one, because Tom has had a whole other life before this. One that took him to Germany and Kyrgyzstan, but also to some remote places like Alaska. Once upon a time, he worked in the Pentagon too. Yes, the very same Tom who is now braving his alarm every morning to help his city, he was there. So to really understand where Tom comes from, let's go back to the very beginning.
I was the youngest of three. I have two older sisters. And my formative years, I grew up in Newport News, Virginia. My dad was an Army aviator, both rotary wing and fixed wing. And early on in my life, we moved to Germany. And my dad was stationed over there for 4 years. I think I was kindergarten through third grade. And then we actually came back to Newport News, Virginia.
Tom comes from a military family. Service is in his blood. Or if it isn't, then there's definitely something that's quite different in the water in Virginia, because somewhere along the way, he also decided to dip his toes in. When he was finishing high school, he started to look into military colleges.
I don't know if it was so much that I thought my dad's job was cool, because I really wasn't overly interested in being an aviator. But really, it was just the concept of duty, honor, country, and the positive winning attitude, and just disciplined approach, rigor, that kind of just tied in with who I am.
It seems like Tom already knew who he was then. I mean, it can be hard to fathom, right? Most people at 17, they don't really know who they are, what they're doing, and probably aren't quite ready to set their sights so directly on their future. But Tom was different.
We had this thing in high school I like to share with folks sometimes, right? And so we had this thing called senior prophecies, right? And so I had a lot of my really good friends that were on this committee before the senior banquet, and then they're kind of announcing the prophecies. And they said, it's like 30 years from now, Tom Joyce wrote a book, and it's entitled, I'm Tom Joyce, and You're Not. And so afterwards, I go, what was that? And everybody's laughing and laughing. And I'm like, what's that? You guys are dissing me. What's going on? And they go, well, you've just been a cocky son of a gun, your whole life, but we still love you. So, my mom and dad have video of me playing flag football over in Germany in American youth activities. And I'm sitting there yelling at a kid because he's watching the cheerleader and not concentrating on the game. And literally, I think I'm 8 years old at that point.
So yes, even at a young age, Tom was a confident guy. His friends and family, they'll say cocky, but we won't go there. Either way, one thing's for sure, he knew exactly who he was, and he was going to get into an ROTC program. Now, I don't want to take anything for granted, so in case you're not familiar, ROTC stands for Reserve Officers Standing Corps. It's a leadership training program that prepares college students for service. At the end of their degree, they go on to serve in the Army, the Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force.
I ended up selecting the Air Force. I don't know, but I kind of think my parents were more in favor of me going into the Air Force, because if you've been on United States Air Force installations, they really are focused on quality of life and good infrastructure, good people. And I guess they had noticed that.
So Tom applied to the University of Virginia. He got in, and that was it. Scholarship was in the pocket. He was ready to do the college thing.
spent the next 4 years of my life doing what young college kids do, enjoy life as a college student, participate in fraternity, intramurals, and get enough schoolwork done that I passed, and knew at the end of the 4 years, basically stay out of trouble and you're going to be a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force.
In that way, Tom's college experience was kind of a breeze. He got to enjoy it because he knew exactly where he was headed. Plus, he felt supported in pursuing his vocation. He didn't have firsthand experience yet, but at home, he had his very own personalized guidance counselor.
I think initially it was more my mom than my dad, but over time, my dad was very proud of me as well. But it's funny. I remember distinctly when I was departing Newport News, Virginia to go to my first duty station in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. It was about a 2-day drive, I guess, and 2.5-day drive. And, he gave me some really good guidance on the way out. And particularly the guidance that has stuck with me was don't delegate and disappear. And what he meant is, as an officer, you're going to be given a lot of things to do, and delegate it. Be responsible in your delegation. Know that you're always held accountable. And he was exactly right. They carried me all the way through my career.
When I hear this part of Tom's story, I can't help but think it's kind of like inheriting the family business. Like he grew up in it, he identified with the values, and his family moved around. So really everything in Tom's life was building up to that moment. But even so, once you're there, things start to look a little different from the inside.
There's a little bit of a culture shock just being in a different part. The United States is huge geographically. So even though it was still Southeast United States, I was living in Northwest Florida, which some people fondly call LA, as in Lower Alabama. And, it's just different. I was fortunate. I had a great roommate that I met on day one of the Air Force, and we found a great apartment right on the beach in Okaloosa Island, and you can't beat it. So we were living a good life as young second lieutenants. But the Air Force gives you a lot of responsibilities. And if you succeed, they give you more responsibilities. And so somewhere along the line in that first tour of duty, I was given the opportunity to apply for a graduate school program. And I'm like, you can't beat this. They're going to send me to graduate school like on their dime, and it's going to count for my time. They kind of throw you a bone, and then with that bone, you take it, and then you're adding more time that you owe back.
The Air Force is smart. They know that there is an active duty service commitment at the end of their offer, right? So it's a deal. It's like, we give you more education and you give us a few more years. But from the get-go, Tom was given opportunities to grow within the Air Force, and that was super motivating. It got him hooked.
They give you great opportunities, and there's great coaches and teachers and mentors to help you through. And next thing you know, 28 years added up. It went by real fast, though, let me tell you.
Now, you might think you know what life looks like, 28 years in the military. Often with the force, what comes to mind is being deployed away from family, or maybe being in command of a unit on the front lines. But actually,
I'm 180 degrees from that. I'm a combat support services person, right? I work in the background providing quality of life, emergency services, really to the installation itself. The difference between an installation and a local government is that the installation just has this big fence around it, right? And it's a secured complex and probably more physical security measures, but that's about it. We have families, we have grocery stores, we have child development centers, we have schools on a military installation, right? We have roads, we have water treatment plants, the whole 9 yards.
Tom runs quickly through those ideas, but it's good to pause here, I think. A military base is run like a small town. It's something most of us don't really think about. There are residential quarters, schools, grocery stores, emergency services, and people working in them. Tom, he spent a lot of his career overseeing these services and managing teams. He built his life in these communities. In fact, that's how he met his partner.
I was fortunate to meet my wife, Caroline, in our first assignment. She was also a lieutenant in the Air Force. And then, we've been, yeah.
Come on, Tom. You can't leave it there. We need to hear the details.
So I think I was running a 5K race or something, and she was part of the sign up, and I was late getting there. I was like signing up at the end, so I just signed up and went and ran, and I guess she said, I got to meet that guy, whatever. And then a week or so later, we're at a meeting, and she plopped down and sat next to me and my buddy. And my buddy keeps asking me, who's that? And I go, I have no idea. And then next thing you know, I introduced myself and asked her out on a date the next week. I think we went out for lunch. And then here we are 30 plus years later.
Now they're married and have 3 kids. So, when you hear this, it's easy to see why Tom spent 3 decades in the Air Force. He built his whole life in it. For him, the military wasn't just a job. It was an entire lifestyle. Having said that, his career was phenomenal. He got his master's degree, and he went from a lieutenant to a captain. He got to work in Central America, in Panama to be specific, where he stayed for 4 years. And that was only the start of 2 decades he spent moving from opportunity to opportunity. Inside the Air Force, Tom felt he was valued for his talent, and that wasn't nothing.
And I'll tell a quick little story that I share with a lot of my teammates, because oftentimes leaders don't take the time to tell their subordinates, and not even their direct subordinates, people in the ranks, how good they are and what they could be, and help steer them. So I was doing this job that I really loved. It tied into my master's degree, and I really was enjoying it. And then I was asked to do a job where I worked for the number 2 officer at the wing in Panama. And the colonel asked me if I wanted this particular job where I was going to be leading exercises and also doing some not so great work, what we call inspector general, but it's important work where you listen to complaints and you try to work through it as kind of an ombudsman, right? So he thought I was the right person for the job and called me in his office, and he could read that I was like not too keen on it. And so he said, he goes, hey, how about this? This was a Friday. He goes, how about thinking about it this weekend? Let's get together again Monday morning. So I went home that weekend, and the whole time, I'm talking to Caroline, and I'm just kicking myself. I'm going, what a wimp. He sees that I can do it, but I'm scared to do it. I don't want to fail, and da-da-da. And I came back in his office on Monday morning as scheduled, and I just said, hey, sir, thanks so much for the opportunity. I appreciate your confidence in me, and I'm going to go ahead and take you up your offer, and thank you very much. And he looked me straight in the eye, and he said, I knew you'd say that.
Taking that chance on a job he wasn't sure about, Tom didn't know it then, but it was about to open some new doors. His career was about to take a turn, because when you show up and take on a challenge, people notice.
Out of the blue, I was asked to go to the Pentagon as a young captain. And then I didn't, how did I get selected for this? I didn't know anybody up there. And then I meet with a senior leader who's become a great friend and mentor of mine over the years. And he goes on and tells me that these 2 colonels on his staff had recommended me to come to the air staff. And I'll tell you, always be on the lookout for who's out there that could potentially succeed you somewhere down the line. You got to look for talent and then help them. That's my practice. That's what I try to do myself, is always be on the lookout for talent.
From then on, Tom moved through jobs fast. In total, he was in Washington, D.C. for 5 years in the early 2000s. Post 9/11, his role was to do strategic planning for potential war efforts. Later, he also directed installations in Germany and Kyrgyzstan. But the way he learned to be in command, his first time in an executive role like that, it was in Alaska. Now, I want to stop on this experience specifically, because I think it gives a really good sense of what Tom was like in his job. You see, moving to Alaska showed Tom what he loved to do, and that's taking care of the community, organizing resources.
There was about 600 plus on our team. We were taking care of all of food and beverage operations on the base, the lodging, both temporary and permanent lodging, dormitories for the airmen, and a very broad scope of what we call morale, welfare, and recreation activities. That's child and youth development centers, school-age programs for kids, golf courses, bowling centers. So just a wide variety of taking care of airmen and civilians and their families.
If a military installation was a city government, Tom was basically in charge of housing, education, social services, and parks and rec. I mean, what's not in there? Oh, yeah, the city planning. Yeah, he did get a slice of that too.
When I was in Alaska, we had an old facility. It was an old retail facility, what we call an exchange, which is just like a basic, a Target type of facility. And they had moved, and we had an opportunity to change that. So we turned that into what we call the Arctic Oasis. We got a team together and got some great ideas, and we made it really an indoor community center complex where everything from walking track, age-appropriate playgrounds to skateboard park, et cetera, coffee shop. So that was fun. I was able to get that done in 2 years. So that was our job there. And then, it's not just day to day. You got to do your day to day work, but you got to have time for planning for the future. Because if you need a new facility, if you need a new equipment or what have you, you got to program that, plan for that. And so you can get the funds for it so you can execute.
So a lot of military life can be this too. It's a different version of service, something a little closer to community engagement, but it's equally valuable.
I'll tell you what the skills are that our service members are. They're disciplined, they're trainable, they're motivated, they're passionate, and they can learn something, right? Everything's learnable.
Truth is, this kind of service, it's a skill, it's a talent, and you can't get trained for this everywhere. So Tom might not have always been conscious of it, but from mission to mission, he was refining his expertise.
About mid-career, or a little bit before mid-career, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force at the time, General Ronald Fogelman, came up with what he called the Little Blue Book, and it was the Air Force values. Every airman in the United States Air Force knows those values, and that is integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. And so we talk about integrity, we talk about service, that public service motivation, and we talk about striving for excellence. Winning matters. There's no second place. We don't talk about this frequently, in defense and armed services, but there's no second place. Our armed services are there to protect our way of life, and that means you got to win. And it all wraps up into the duty, honor, country. So having those values as an organization, no matter what organization you're in, that everybody can put their arm around those values and they mean something to them and have discussions about them, to me is very, very important.
The other thing that's baked into the dynamic of military life is teamwork, cooperation, and that is needed literally everywhere.
Over time, you understand that you can't get it all done yourself. And even, one person LLCs probably can't get it all done themselves. They probably got to lean on a IT support for a contract, or they got to lean on a CPA to help with their finances. So there's this domino effect of we're better together, and we work together and be honest and open with each other. These concepts of trust, they're meaningful, and you got to talk about them because you spend most of your waking hours at work, and you want work to be a place that you're comfortable and you can have these tough conversations, these candid conversations with your teammates.
Building that trust matters because the nature of the job is that oftentimes your mission ends before you can see the fruit of your labor.
You're typically only in the job for 1 to 2 years, and then you move on. And most people look at it like, well, that's crazy. So when you take a position, you have to understand what your predecessors have been advocating for and what's planned for, and you have to carry that torch. And so sometimes you can't do your legacy project. You got to carry the torch because this has all been planned out, it's programmed, and it makes sense, and you just got to continue fighting for it so you can get the resources for that.
So a career in the military, it's often a succession of opportunities linked in a chain. Tom's life in the Air Force was no exception. By the end of his career, Tom had lived abroad and he was a colonel. He was known for his ability to step up where and when he was needed.
And then I remember I got a call out of the blue as the next assignment was coming, and it was from a former boss of mine who called and said, "Hey, Tom, just going to tell you what your next position is going to be." And I said, "Okay, so what's that?" And he says, "We're going to move you to Dover, Delaware to be the commander of the mortuary." And again, this is at the height of the buildup in Afghanistan. And I was stunned. I didn't really say anything. And then he goes, TJ, are you still there? And I go, "Oh, I'm here." And I said, "Sir, I'm the fun guy." Why you said to me there, "I'm the fun guy"? And he said, "Because you're who we need."
Lesson learned there. Sometimes it's not about what you'd like to do next. It's about what you're good at, where you're missed.
resilience matters, right? People are doing a very difficult job. The duty, honor, and respect for our fallen and the care and the support that we're going to give their family members. They were going through some tough times, and the Air Force thought I might be the right leader to help them through that. That was about a 20-month job, and it was a lot. Probably compartmentalized a lot of that personally. But from there, I kind of got my dream job, to be honest.
The dream job? It was really big. Tom was sent to San Antonio in Texas to become the Director of Services for Welfare and Recreation. This time, he was going to do this at the agency level. That's the most strategic operational level in the U.S. Air Force. In this role, Tom was in charge of support and guidance to over 47,000 base level leaders. It's hard to top that. And in fact, he wouldn't. Because the dream job was also going to be his last in the Air Force. At this point in our story, I hope it's clear to you just how rich Tom's life in the Air Force had been, how much he'd learned, which is why leaving, it felt out of the question to some extent. Let's just say Tom was not expecting it. Not now.
I'm there in San Antonio, and I was hoping to do that last job for 4 years, which would give me 30 years, which is kind of the max at the time for colonels to retire. But about a year and a half in, or maybe even a year into it, the Air Force realized that we had more colonels than we need.
Overstaffed. Yeah, that kind of thing happens, even in meticulous organizations like the Air Force.
It's not frequent. They're always making adjustments. They're looking, it's a zero-sum game. We need some money for something else, et cetera, et cetera. So they were going to have what they refer to as a SERB, Selective Early Retirement Board. And that means you're competing against all your peers that came in when you did to stay in. And I was working for the Air Force Personnel Center at the time, and some of my good friends were telling me like, hey, TJ, you got a great track record, but there's people with a better track record than you. They kind of gave me some inside baseball, we call it. Again, this is all colonels. You've all been successful leaders. You've been commanders of thousands of people, so you make it easier for everybody if you just go ahead and say, hey, thanks for allowing me to serve for 28 years. I'm going to leave with my head held high and go look for what's next.
Tom knew what was at stake. He wanted to leave on good terms, so he was ready to bite the bullet. But he wasn't going to go without a negotiation.
So here's the deal. If you meet the board, if you select to meet the board and you don't make it through, you have to retire in 90 days. But if you opt to voluntarily retire before the board meets, they give you a year to retire. So I said, the last thing I want to do is feel like I'm getting kicked off a team that I've given my whole life to and I love. I'm going to go ahead and take the voluntary approach and retire and then prepare myself over the next year for the ultimate transition into the rest of my life.
The rest of my life. This is what gets me. At that point, Tom had been part of this world, this microcosm. It's like you get how everything works, you're looked after. You know your community and their needs. You're confident about what you bring to the table. And then, just like that, you got to get back out there. Some people have to turn that around in 3 months. That's so short. Tom, he at least got a year, but that is not a whole lot of time to figure out what you want to do. In fact, Tom will tell you.
I probably rushed into it, to be honest. I ran through the tape, and then I really didn't plan the way ahead as well as I could have. We had 3 young kids, one in high school in San Antonio. So I kind of said, I'd like to stay in San Antonio, but, I didn't know. And I ended up taking, ultimately, what I would just call the wrong job for me.
So, yeah. Tom jumped at the first opportunity. That got him a job in banking. And in fairness, I don't think it was really such a bad call. The company was USAA, a banking and insurance company headquartered in San Antonio. They catered to the military community, which means it was a known entry point. Yes, we recruit veterans, and yeah, we recognize your skills.
I was really looking for initially some leadership opportunities, maybe in the hospitality business. And then I also was looking at some city and county government type of roles. And then ultimately I talked to a friend/mentor of mine who was a senior leader with USAA. And so I just had lunch with him and was getting his opinion. He retired as a general officer in the Air Force, and I'd worked with him years ago in Panama. And then at the end of the lunch, he said, hey, we'd like to have you on our team. But so then I got really fixated with USAA. And I'm not saying that negatively. They're a great company, but I think I got overly fixated.
And the thing is, it's easy to understand how that happened. For veterans, it's often very difficult to re-enter the job market. They're really not sure if their skill set will be recognized. I mean, most people don't know what you do in the force besides combat, right? So what will they see in your CV? A recent study from a nonprofit called Call of Duty Endowment shows that veterans often take their first job available after they leave the force, and they don't really wait to find their best fit. That's exactly what happened to Tom. He made a decision that felt easy, but it wasn't right for him.
I kind of knew it a week getting into it, to be honest with you. I had been given a lot of freedom of maneuver prior to that. And, I liked working with people. I liked the work that I was doing. But from where I had been, my transition, I felt like this wasn't even close to a lateral, that it was more along the lines of work that I had done maybe 15 years prior. And I'll be honest, it was a little bit of a blow to the ego. And I just couldn't deal with it as well as I should have. Maybe that's where it goes back to lacking in patience. And I realize that now. But it was my own fault. I shouldn't have accepted that job. It wasn't the right fit for me. And it was a great company, great people, great mission. I just took the wrong job. I don't blame anybody but myself.
Back then, Tom knew that his next career would need to give him leadership, but he didn't see the full spectrum of his skill set. Tom was good with people, and he had worked with many communities. He liked to engage, and he needed a job that would let him do that. So at this point, it might be worth reconsidering that high school premonition. Do you remember it? I'm Tom Joyce, and you're not. It was a joke then, but it said something about our friend TJ. He knew exactly who he was. Now, it was time to see what that meant outside of the force.
It might take you 3 tries to find the right fit, and you have to be okay with it. You've been putting on the uniform for over 20 years, but at this point, it is me incorporated. It's not going from selfless to selfish. It's about if you want to contribute and feel good about what you're doing at the end of the day, you got to be in a position that you enjoy, in a role that you enjoy.
Tune in next week to continue Tom's journey and to hear some insights from brand new guests.
When you leave the service, you definitely leave something behind. But at the same time, you're gaining a new family. When you start participating in your local American Legions, your VETS program, VFWs, your American Veterans programs, you name it, there's opportunities to participate.
That's right. There's a lot more to come from our veteran story. You've been listening to Impact in Action, a podcast from MGT, a provider of technological and social impact solutions. Thank you to Tom Joyce for sharing his life with us. We genuinely love speaking with him. If you enjoy this podcast, then you should subscribe right now. Just go do it. A couple of clicks. You can also leave a review or a 5-star rating. Every little bit helps. For this episode, our production coordinator was Sarah Bailly, supervision from Tiffany Reynolds. We make this podcast with the team at Lower Street. Writing and production from Lise Lavati, sound design from Ben Crannell. I'm your host, Chase Christiansen. Thank you, and see you again next time on Impact in Action.